This is a reading from the notebooks by Marie Valtorta, 1945 to 1950, January 28th, 1947. Concerning the dictations on August 24th, 29th, and 30th, and September 2nd, 1944, in the pre-gospel, Jesus says, "Given the obstinate response of some of these luminous points in my teaching, which ought to open up many horizons for you, and help your souls and the souls administered by you to tend towards this rejoicing, which is the recollection, knowledge, and recognition of what God is, and enjoys a little bit of heaven on earth, and receive therefrom great assistance for progressing in perfection, let us deal with the topic as if we were facing stubborn children with whom one must never grow tired of teaching, and with arguments which cannot be rejected. What is man? The Catechism says, a creature endowed with reason, composed of soul and body. What is the soul? The Catechism says, the noblest part of man, because it is a spiritual substance endowed with intellect and will, capable of knowing God and possessing him eternally. Who created man? The Catechism says, God created him. Why did he create him? The Catechism says, so that man may know, love, and serve him in this life and enjoy him in the other forever. How did God create him? Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 says, and the Lord formed man from the mud of the earth, and breathed the breath of life into life, and man became a living creature. And Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 says, God created man in his image. The Catechism confirms man was created in the image and likeness of God. And how? Perhaps in his face? In the shape of his body? God does not have a body or a face. To become man, I had to take on your shape, for I had no bodily shape of my own. God is most perfect spirit, simple, eternal, with no beginning or end. The Catechism thus teaches that man is said to have been created in the image and likeness of God. For the human soul is spiritual and endowed with reason, free in its working, capable of knowing and loving God, and of enjoying him eternally. Perfections, which in man reflect a ray of the infinite greatness of the Lord. A ray of the infinite greatness of the Lord. A great truth, since only we, as triune, know ourselves and enjoy ourselves with the fullness of joy, generating ourselves through this joyful love, which is knowledge of our most perfect perfection. And we wanted you to have us as an example to create in you the divinized creature that is man, as a son of God. For this reason we placed love in you, which is our essence, and we proposed love as the goal of perfection in order for you to come to be with us without end, just as you were in us before creation existed, when we contemplated you, before you emerged from nothingness so as to be, according to our will, the creature in whom God, who divinely conceived this creature for his glory, is reflected. Now in God there can be nothing except what pertains to God. Man thus belongs to God, and in full justice can call him Father, and in right and proper justice must want to reach and possess him, after having striven to love him and to know him. Blessed are those who are able to ascend to the summit of blessedness, which is union with God, that is, knowledge of God, fusion with love, contemplation of the Trinity, which is one, of the fire that does not consume, but recreates and supercreates, making the human creature what he was conceived to be by love, a God who is a Son of God. The Father has truly placed the seal of his paternity in his Son, the capacity to know and love God in both this life and the next. God, then, created man as composed of two substances, one called the body, initially created with mud and subsequently procreated with the flesh and blood of man, and one called the soul, which uniquely created in each case, only once, and for one flesh, descends to unite itself to the flesh, forming in a womb. Without the soul, man would be an animal creature, guided by instinct and natural gifts. Without the body, man would be a spiritual creature, with the supernatural gifts of intelligence, will, and grace, like the angels. In addition to existence, what had God given to the masterwork of creation, represented by man, in whom the two creatures, animal and spiritual, are joined? Gratuitous gifts which theologians divide into natural, preternatural, and supernatural. Natural, a healthy, beautiful body with 5 perfect senses and a rational soul endowed with intelligence, will, and freedom. Preternatural, integrity, that is, the perfect subject of sense, free from incitements of every kind, to reason, the immortality of the body, which would not have experienced the horror of death, immunity from all pain, and knowledge in keeping with his state as a chosen creature, and thus great knowledge, which his perfect intellect assimilated without effort. Supernatural, the beatific vision of God, the grace making man a son of God, and the destiny of enjoying God eternally. Man, then, by virtue of both his origin and the gifts received, could truly call himself a son of God, and know him as a son knows his father. What is grace? The Catechism says grace is a supernatural gift which illumines the mind and moves and comforts the will so that man will do good and refrain from evil. But it is love above all, God's love for his favorite creature, who is man, a love elevating the creature to the nature of the Creator through deification, in such fashion that the words of wisdom are fitting. You are gods and sons of the Most High. Footnote 288. Psalm 82 verse 6 and John chapter 34 verse 10. It is, moreover, a means of salvation, since man needs means of salvation, having remained weak through the consequences of sin, indescribably active, when it does not encounter impediments or inertia in you, in regard to the work it seeks to carry out in you. It sanctifies the creature and the creature's actions, and has 3 lesser branches emerging from its sublime trunk, which are called actual, sufficient, and efficacious grace. But it is a single grace, a transforming principle, a divine quality inherent in the soul, like light, whose splendor, enveloping and penetrating souls, cancels out their stains from sin and communicates a radiant beauty to them. This is taught by the Church in the conclusions of the Council of Trent, and I, the teacher of teachers, contemplating grace for what it is, in the eternal, is of God, say that grace is a principle transforming the creature into a son of God, a divine quality, which is thus similar to the light from which it comes, whose splendor, enveloping and penetrating souls, whether it is a gift given, as it was to Adam, or a gift given back, as with the Catholic Christians restored to grace through the merits of my sacrifice and the sacrament instituted by me, communicates to them not only a radiant beauty, but the capacity to see and know God, just as the first man knew him by seeing and comprehending him with his spirit filled with innocence and grace. Grace, then, means restoring man to the capacity to love and know God. Grace, then, is a light to see what is immense darkness for man's thought, but infinite light for the Spirit in grace. It is, then, a voice, and a very wise voice, sight most luminous, sight to contemplate God, a gift given to assist the soul's desire to know God, a means to remember the origin, just as that origin wishes to be remembered, and an instrument for the deification of the creature. And the more creatures, through their own will and through the justice attained by way of loving will, grow in grace, the more what is union with the divine will grow in them, along with wisdom, which is one of the divine attributes, and with wisdom the capacity to comprehend, know, and love truth and truths. For grace is the Spirit of God who enters into man with all his gifts, transforming, elevating, and sanctifying man's faculties and actions. And among these, the first one and the main one is love, the action through which you were created. To love is to know. Only those known are loved. The more one knows, the more one loves. No one could claim to love an unknown relative, or a man living worlds away just as a relative living nearby, or a family friend is loved. Love for the former will not go beyond an abstract feeling of brotherhood or kinship, which brings no joy if it lasts, or pain if it ceases. whereas the loss of a relative who is known well, or a friend, is real pain. And when it has occurred, people try to preserve every reminder of him in order to feel the loss less intensely, or, if it is only a case of being far away, they try in every manner to make it less complete, so as to perceive the absence as less serious. Observe the eagerness with which boys who have become orphans in childhood seek to reconstruct for themselves an ideal image of their deceased parents, through memories left by them, or garnered from the lips of relatives and friends. Creatures need to love, and must remember to feel less alone and love. Memory is like a chain hurled into the distance, joining one to the beloved. The end is not visible, but the movements which are felt to be arriving along the loving chain of mutual memory tell us that we are loved as we love. For this reason, God gave the first human beings knowledge of himself, so that they would be perfectly happy in the period of grace and joy, and then receive a reminder which would further unite them to the Father, hidden behind the haze of sin, rising up like a wall between the fallen and perfection, but not definitively lost, because love endured. Adam and Eve knew God, received the spiritual beatific vision of him, and understood his essence, because their spirits, I say spirits, in grace were able to grasp his incorporeal, supreme beauty, and understand his wisdom in God's voice in the freshness of the evening. Oh, sweet conversations, the raptures of creatures deified with God, their Maker, in the peace of the earthly paradise, divine teachings learned without effort by two intellects, unflawed by physical imperfections or moral imperfections, accepted without that stubbornness which makes it hard for you to accept the divine lessons, for you are no longer able to love like the innocents. O poor men, mutilated by too many holy things, and filled with too many others that are useless and harmful. Poor men, who could become perfect again if you possessed a perfect love. O lessons of God, wisdom flowing from the paternal source into his blessed children, received as a gift, loved as a feast, mutual love, which was a word, which was a question, anticipated by an answer, which was trust, which was a smile, which was peace. A page of joy forever destroyed, a page written in the books of life and at the dawn of life, and then sullied, and no longer continued by the indelible imprint of sin. Who can read you to those living in exile so that they will understand what they have lost, and be humble, seeing how far they have fallen, considering how good God is in still giving so much love and wisdom, in spite of the fact that the serpentine head of unsubdued pride is always ready to rise up in them to argue with God, who reveals himself, counsels, or commands for a good purpose. Adam and Eve, then, possessed the gift of grace, which is love, light, wisdom, and knowledge of God. And this gift, since they were at once public and private men, and progenitors of the whole human family, would have been transmitted by them together with the other gifts to their descendants, and there would have been no need for them to labor, to remember God, to climb back up from the darkness to the light, with exertion, going against the stream of temptations, with the haze of ignorance, with all the wretchedness deriving from the fall from grace. There would have been no need for a reminder, because the good lost would not have had to be remembered, but there would have been only joyful delighting in the beloved. Adam and Eve then sinned, and God cast them from his sight, and excluded them from his friendship and from Eden, placing two cherubim at its entrance, as Genesis says, and condemning humanity to work, pain, ignorance, and death as regards its material part, and to privation of grace, knowledge of God, and the heavenly paradise as regards its spiritual part. The Catechism says Adam and Eve lost the grace of God, and the right they had to heaven. They were cast out of the earthly paradise, subjected to many forms of indigence in their souls and bodies, and condemned to die. And their descendants, by inheriting sin, suffered the harm of being deprived of grace, losing paradise, ignorance, the inclination towards evil, all the wretchedness of life, and finally death, in such fashion that if God had not shown mercy, men would not have been able to be saved. What form of mercy did God show the human race? Genesis further replies in its pages, and the Catechism in its answers. The mercy of immediately promising Adam the divine Redeemer or Messiah, and sending him in due time to free men from the slavery of the devil and sin, restoring them to the state of children of God by giving them back the state of grace, through my merits and my passion. So, tell me then, if at the very moment of the condemnation God the Father was already tempering it in its severity with the hope of a Redeemer, with the promise of forgiveness, doesn't this serve to demonstrate that he himself, always mercy, even in justice, for he is eternal and perfect charity, wanted some sparks of light to remain in man's soul, enveloped in darkness and pain? Reminders which would impede the despair, discouragement, abandonment, and anguish of those who no longer have a purpose, and drag on their days without the energy of hope. Yes, in reality, that's the way it was. And summarizing what has been said up to this point, taken from Genesis, a book written under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and thus having God as its author, as the Vatican Council explains, footnote 289, the sentence is obviously referring to the First Vatican Council, and from the Catechism, in the text prescribed by my true vicar and pastor, who is now with me in heaven after having loved me perfectly, and thus remembered me on earth, a truth which no one can reject without declaring himself to be a heretic. One can conclude that innocent man in grace received the gift of grace to know, love, and enjoy God eternally, and fallen man received the gift of mercy through a promise, a reminder, then, of the divine, which would help him to act properly so as to be able to enjoy in a secure future, after the pain of punishment, the vision and possession of God. And now, after having dealt with the topic in general, let us get down to considering it in the points which you are unable, or rather do not want to accept. In the dictations of the pre-gospel on August 24th, 29th, and 30th of 1944, and September 2nd, 1944, childhood of the Most Holy Mary, on September 2nd, 1944, I said, "There are mysteries which are too lofty for you to be able to understand them fully. The learned, above all, cannot comprehend them. The simple-hearted, instructed by love and wisdom alone, understand them better, because they do not criticize them. For them, a supernatural word communicating peace is a true word, and they welcome it with humility and gratitude. But I repeat, there are mysteries which cannot be comprehended if they are dissected on the basis of a human analytical method. Either one has great faith and inflamed charity, and then they become sufficiently clear, or one does not understand them. But I advise you at least to accept the lights I give you to make your science less incomplete. Always remember that even the most learned man remains too little and finite in comparison to the infinite and the wisdom of the infinite. And I also advise you not to alter my words or deform their meaning so as to cause the spokesman affliction. It is not charitable to sadden one's brothers and sisters and accuse the innocent. You want to know how it could be said that the souls pre-exist? Where did you find that word which I did not say? In the bottom of your thoughts, not in my pages. Souls do not pre-exist. They are not objects piled up in warehouses to be carried off at the right time. God does not need stocks to have the material ready. In the dictation on August the 24th, 1944, I say to little John, "You have seen the continuous generation of souls by God." I use that term to give all of you a more intense sensation than ever that man is a son of God, because the Father is the one who begets, and also to bring you to understand the beauty of the part in you that is like God. There is nothing in God which is not God. Your souls, then, in coming from God, are supernaturally divinized, both through their origin and grace, which is infused into believers in the true God and Christ, the Redeemer, by holy baptism, and conserved by fleeing from sin. If I was already illuminating the purpose by showing the principle, which is the heavenly life of possession of God, and did so while showing the principle, the creation of the soul by God to become incarnate in flesh and be sanctified during existence, so as to be a victor in heaven, I ought to have been understood. For you are not fools, but learned, and are so concerned about this science of yours. Comprehend, then, with good will, the thought of your Lord, which is clear and comprehensible for all those willing to understand it. What about it? You would be like those who accused me in my mortal days, and still accuse me, because I say it is preferable to do violence to oneself by removing a sinning eye or hand or foot, rather than conserve them while sinning. Do you not understand the metaphor then? Are you unable to transfer a material comparison into the spiritual domain? Well then, if you are so limited, I shall make provision by replacing the term generation with the other, creation. Pre-Gospel, page 13. I gave the spokesman the vision of the creation of souls. Footnote 290. See the entries for May 25th and 31st in the notebooks 1944. Read the vision described by the spokesman. Notebook ST, page 63, May 25th, 1944. A vision which, as I stated further on notebook XY, pages 794 to 796, May 31st, 1944, was given in such fashion as to make the material act of creation visible to the seer. In describing that vision, the spokesman used the term create, line 30, page 63, notebook ST, just as he states with truth and simplicity that he does not see because he is in paradise, an utterly precise conclusion by the seer when original sin sullies souls. In paradise, in fact, that cannot occur. From this you see that the spokesman is truthful, and he further declares that he does not see the spirits who, when their time on earth is over, separate from the flesh and return to be judged. Maria says that she comprehends how they are judged from the changes in Jesus' expression, line 74 on the same page. To return to the origin, to present oneself before Jesus, the judge, does not mean to go to a given place or exactly to go to the foot of the eternal throne. These are formulas used to assist your thought. The soul that leaves the flesh which it animated finds itself immediately before the divinity, who judges it with no need to ascend and present itself at the threshold of the blessed kingdom. The Catechism holds that God is in heaven, on the earth, and everywhere, and the encounter thus takes place everywhere. The divinity fills creation with itself. It is present, then, in every place in creation. It is I who judge, but I am inseparable from the Father and the Holy Spirit, omnipresent in every place. Judgment is swift, as creation was swift, less than 1,000th of your smallest unit of time. But, as in the atom of the instant of creation, the soul has time to glimpse the most holy origin that creates it, and takes this memory with it, so that it will be an instinctive religion and guide in the search for faith, hope, and charity, which, if you observe carefully, are, in a nebulous fashion, like unformed seeds, even in the most imperfect religions. Faith in a divinity, hope in a reward given by this divinity, love for this divinity. In the atom of the instant of the private judgment, the spirit has time to comprehend what it has not wanted to comprehend in earthly life, and has hated as an enemy, or mocked, or denied as a vain fable, or served, perhaps, with lukewarmness, which demands reparation, and bear with it to the place of expiation, or to eternal damnation. This memory, to prompt flames of love for eternal beauty, or the torture of punishment, with rage over the good that has been lost, regarding which the intelligent conscience will bring reproach for having wanted freely to lose it, for they will remember it, and as terrible, without being able to contemplate it, together with their sins. The creation of the soul and the private judgment are two atoms of instants in which the souls of the children of men intellectually know God, to the extent which is proper and sufficient to give them an instrument to tend towards their good, barely glimpsed, but remaining impressed upon their substance, which, as intelligent, free, simple, and spiritual, has immediate comprehension, free will, simple desires, and movement or inclination or appetite, if you prefer, to reunite itself with love, to him from whom it came, and reach its end, whose beauty it has already intuited, or separated from it with perfect hatred, reaching him who is their damned king, and possessing him in the memory of hatred, a torment, the greatest of the infernal torments, an indescribable despair and malediction. Remember the dictation on January 15th, 1944, footnote 291. See the notebooks, 1944. My saying, "Be perfect as the Father is perfect," was not a vain or exaggerated statement. Man was about to be elevated again to the state of grace. I could then, very rightly, give this command of perfection, because you had been created for perfection. And this desire of the just for perfection is a spiritual desire coming directly from God, who goes so far as to give you the command, "Walk in my presence and be perfect." Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. And more broadly, though implicitly, he repeats it to you in the law of Sinai, and in the lessons of the sapiential books, and in the words of the patriarchs, the prophets, and all of the inspired in whom it is I who speak. And finally, as directly and explicitly as can be, in my command, "Be perfect as your Father is perfect." And like an echo of my eternal word, it is in the words of my saints, from Peter on. Be perfect, I said, to free the spirits of those in ancient times from that anguishing sense of fear which prohibited them from being able to think they were worthy to resemble their Father. For too many centuries the Most High had been the terrible God for them, and love and hope and faith had trembled before the severe immensity of God. But the time of mercy, forgiveness, peace, friendship, and filiation with God had now come. The command of unlimited perfection was thus given: "Be perfect, as the Father is perfect." And with the command, the implicit assurance encouraging you to be daring, for if you only want to, you can become so. God does not carry out vain acts or say vain words. I did not give a vain command, then, or provide a vain stimulus for your hearts with this command. I reawakened a desire in you which had diminished, which my Father and yours had placed in an intense way in the spirit of man, and which man was to transmit with every other gift of God to his descendants. The desire to possess God, to enjoy him in heaven after a lifetime spent in his service. This desire, intensely reawakened, would have been vain if it had not been destined to turn into reality. But creatures can reach this reality. It is, indeed, God's desire that they reach it, and it is for this reason that God leaves in the soul, even of the most savage, a reminder of God, whereby that soul, as best it can, may in a more or less distant future arrive at its goal, the knowledge of God, which is blessedness, though having loved and served him as well as it could so as to possess him afterwards. And if most souls then live in a way which seems to belie my assertion, that is not a negation of what I am saying, but a demonstration of how perverted man is in his affections and desires because of his alliances with evil. There are truly many who strangle their souls with the noose of vices and sins after making them slaves of Satan, with whom they have allied themselves. They strangle them definitively, so as not to hear them cry out and weep any longer, recalling that evil is not licit, and that there is a punishment for those carrying it out. They are the ones who change from the children of God into human creatures through the loss of grace, and then change from men into demons. For man, when separated from goodness, is bindweed, which clings to evil in order to prop itself up. Where there is no supernatural law, it is hard for there to be moral law, and always imperfectly. And where human morality is imperfect or absent, the threefold concupiscence is alive, in whole or in part.